All right, so Carl Froch says that if he decides to fight again, the most likely opponent is going to be Gennady Golovkin. Now, I did a video a few weeks ago prior to the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight, and the video was called 10 Fights I Prefer Over Mayweather-Pacquiao, something like that. And one of those fights I mentioned was a Triple G versus Carl Froch. I think it's a fantastic matchup. I'd be very, very excited if that fight got announced. Obviously, I'd love to see it. Froch says that he's going to sit down in the next few days with his family and Eddie Hearn in a room and decide what he's going to do. And as I say, the Triple G fight is going to be apparently the most likely one. Maybe he'll do it at Wembley Stadium in front of 80,000 and see if he can knock Triple G out like he knocked out George Groves. He'll have to chop down a lot of trees and do a lot of swimming. It will really help his core. Anyway, old joke. I don't know if this fight's going to happen. Carl Froch has had a long career. He's been very successful, obviously. He's financially set for life. He's nearly 40 years old. The way that Carl Froch has to punish himself in training is, I would suggest, more demanding, more physically punishing than a guy like Hopkins, because Hopkins is a much more technical guy. Carl Froch, every time he fights, he accepts that he's not the quickest guy. He's not the technically most gifted guy. So he accepts that he's going to have a high work rate. He's going to have to outwork guys a lot of the time. He's going to have to take punches. And it takes a different level of emotional and mental preparation to know that you're going to have to endure that kind of thing in training camp and in fights than it does if you're a guy like a Mayweather or a Hopkins, who you're probably not going to take that many punches in a fight. It's going to be a nip and tuck affair. It's not going to be a war. Whereas Carl Froch really has to get himself up, both physically in incredible condition, because I'm not sure there's anyone better conditioned than Carl Froch in the world of boxing at the moment. I mean, there may be a few, but very, very few. His ability to rally late in fights is incredible. Just look at his track record of rallying late on in fights. The guy's always in an incredible condition. So to get himself into that kind of condition, to punish himself in the training camps, and to get himself mentally and emotionally up for war is a hard task to do, particularly when you're 38 and you're getting up, waking up in silk pajamas. So whether or not he's going to do it, I don't know. But I'll definitely be excited if Carl Froch versus Gennady Golovkin gets announced. Now, as far as how I see the fight going itself, Froch seems to think that Golovkin is the new Arthur Abraham. I heard him say words to that effect a few times. I think that's a mistake on Carl Froch's part, because I think Golovkin is a hell of a lot better than Abraham. I think Golovkin's run at middleweight is better than Abraham's run at middleweight was. Abraham, yes, is a smaller guy like Golovkin, but I think Golovkin's bigger than Abraham was, And stylistically, Abraham's a guy who, as other people have described it, has got a passive defense. When you're throwing punches at Abraham, he'll just put his hands up and just block the punches. He won't punch with you very often. Whereas Gennady Golovkin will punch with you. And that's the difference. So every time you throw a shot, you're vulnerable against Golovkin, because he could beat you to the punch. He's going to punch with you. I think Golovkin's more precise. In terms of Golovkin's punching power, whether or not he hits harder than Arthur Abraham or hits harder than anyone Froch has been in the ring with before, that remains to be seen. He's been knocking out guys at middleweight, guys who are a lot smaller than Froch, guys who most likely can't take the kind of punishment, the kind of punch that Froch can take. So the jury's out on his power at super middleweight. We really don't know. But in terms of his size, I don't think Golovkin's size is going to be the issue against Carl Froch. I don't think Golovkin's actually that small. People don't realize Carl Froch is not a big super middleweight himself. He's, a decent size in terms of dimensions, as in height and reach. But in terms of his body mass, Carl Froch has never struggled to make 168. You look at all the interviews. The guy makes 168 comfortably. And Golovkin on fight night, when he fights at 160 at middleweight, on fight night he's like 170 at least. So if he moves up to 168 on fight night, he'll probably be 172, maybe as high as 175 on fight night at 168. So I don't think there's going to be that much of a difference in terms of actual weight between Golovkin and Froch on fight night if they fight. The big difference is going to be the fact that, as I say, Golovkin's been effective against much smaller guys than Froch. So fighting a guy who's a similar size to himself or a bit bigger than himself, will his power carry, will his strength carry against a guy like Froch? Because Froch will be definitely the biggest guy. I suppose Ashida was a pretty big guy, but in terms of dimensions, but I don't think he was as big as Froch. But anyway, Froch will most likely be the biggest guy who Golovkin would have fought as a professional. So how will his strength and how will his power carry against a guy like Carl Froch? It's a fascinating fight. I think Golovkin has the technical know-how and ability to exploit the mistakes that Carl Froch makes. Maybe not as, maybe not as effectively as a guy like Andre Ward, because Ward really did a very, very good job at exploiting Carl Froch's mistakes. One of the mistakes that I've pointed out so many times about Froch is that he drops his hands, particularly his right hand, when he's jabbing or when he's fighting a moving target, and he when he throws his combinations, he falls off balance to his right hand side, which leaves him open to a left hook. And that's something I mentioned before the Andre Ward fight. I said, watch Andre Ward catch this guy with left hooks all night, and that's exactly what happened. Now, Gennady Golovkin doesn't give you that movement, so that will give Froch the opportunity. When Froch has a more stationary target or a guy who's coming at him, he doesn't struggle with balance as much. It's when he's got a guy moving around, that's when Froch's poor balance and slow feet get exposed. But when he's got a guy coming at him the way Abraham did, Froch actually manages to stay on balance more often than not, and he keeps his shape much better. Even in the George Groves fight, in the second fight, he really wasn't going looking for Groves in that fight. He was just standing in the middle of the ring, and he didn't want to fall off balance and make those mistakes he made in the first fight. And as you saw there, he was able to avoid most of Groves' shots. You really have to give Carl Froch movement, in and out movement, and mess with the range and distance to be able to get him to try and chase you and fall off balance. And Golovkin's not going to do that. Golovkin will be there in front of him, but as I say, he punches with you. He's pretty good with his counters. Golovkin's not the quickest guy in the world, definitely not, but he's technically very good, and he's going to land shots against Froch. No question about it. If I had to pick a winner provisionally right now, I would pick Golovkin to beat Carl Froch. I don't know if I'd pick him to beat Froch by stoppage, but I'd pick Golovkin to win. I think the Carl Froch of a couple years ago, like the Carl Froch who fought Lucian Bute, I might pick over Golovkin. But at this point in Froch's career, I just feel the emotional energy that it takes to fight the way that Froch does, to put himself through those training camps and to get himself motivated for a fight and a war, not just a fight, because most Froch's fights are wars. The emotional energy, the mental energy, as well as the physical energy it takes to do all that, I'm not sure if he's got that in the tank to get through a Golovkin fight. I'm really not sure about it, man. I mean, maybe he's not even sure about it. I guess he'll figure that out himself once he starts training camp. But I would be picking Golovkin, man, because I'm not confident that Carl Froch has it in the tank anymore at his age after the highs that he's been at. I know he keeps on talking about the George Groves at Wembley, 80,000 and all that, and it's a funny running joke. But in all seriousness, when you've been that high in your career and you've been on that level emotionally and mentally and financially, it must be hard, particularly for a guy like Froch who fights so much on emotions. He needs to be fired up, and he needs to be, he needs to feel a threat to be able to fight to the best of his ability. He's not a cold, calculating kind of fighter like a Mayweather, who really doesn't have any emotion in the ring at all. For him, it's just a purely scientific endeavor. You know, there's no emotion involved in Floyd Mayweather's performances. It's just a purely technical affair. Whereas Carl Froch, he thrives on that emotion. He needs that emotion. He needs that to perform to the best of his ability and to actually get through his fights. And those kind of fighters who trade on emotion so much, those guys tend to burn out quicker. And I think that a Golovkin fight might be a bridge too far. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'd love to find out whether I'm right or wrong, because I think either way it would be a tremendous fight. But I don't know. If I had to pick right now, I would say I'd go with Golovkin. And the Froch of a few years ago, I think, would have stood a better chance, just for the fact that I think Froch a few years ago was more hungry and he had more to prove. Whereas now, what does he prove really by beating Golovkin? People are going to say, well, it's just a smaller guy moving up in weight. Even Froch is saying it. Even Froch himself is is saying it's a smaller guy moving up in weight. So, you know, he's kind of putting a damper on his own potential achievement. So if he beats Golovkin, so what? If he loses to Golovkin, it's like a small middleweight moved up and knocked out Carl Froch or beat Carl Froch. That's what they're going to say. So I don't know what he can really gain out of it, man. I don't know. I mean, don't get it twisted. If he does beat Golovkin, he'll get a certain amount of credit, but maybe not the credit that he really wants. I think if James DeGale beat Golovkin, and then James DeGale went on to do a few other things at super middleweight, maybe he beat Andre Ward or won a rematch with George Groves, I think that is a fight from a credibility point of view which would make more sense for Carl Froch. Right? Just, I'm not saying those things are going to happen, but just imagine that James DeGale was the one who beat Golovkin. Then he beat George Groves. I don't know if he beat, let's say he beat Andre Ward, or maybe Andre Ward moved up in weight to light heavyweight, and it left James DeGale was the number one in the super middleweight division, and DeGale was getting all these plaudits, and people were saying he should be on a pound for pound list. That fight then would make a lot of sense for Carl Froch, because James DeGale would be seen as the number one in the division. It's Carl Froch's division. He's not a smaller guy. He's a younger guy. He's also a British guy. And beating Carl Froch, then coming back and beating a figure like that, that would make more sense, and he would get a lot of plaudits for that. You know, but Golovkin, I don't know, man. Does he really gain that much by beating him? And think of what he stands to lose by losing to a guy like Golovkin. Anyway, I'd love to see the fight. Drop your comments below. Let me know how you feel about it. Do you see it like me, where you think Froch maybe is biting off a little bit more than he can chew at this stage of his career against Golovkin? Or do you think he's got one last performance in him where he could do the business against Gennady? Let me know how you feel in the comment section below. It's your boy Hartman, I'm out.